they're not scared of you. They're scared of what you represent to them. What you represent to them is freedom.
If you have the inconsistency, then you're really not defending liberty.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
I'm going to bring the whole fucking diseased, corrupt temple down on your head.
Hostility against every form of tyranny over the minds of man.
This is the Whiskey and Rebellion podcast.
So I hate hypocrisy. And, I'm probably a hypocrite in some regards, but I try really hard not to be. And most of what I do when looking at politics even, in order to not be a hypocrite, is comparing two starkly juxtaposed positions that someone can have simultaneously, and then trying to make a point out of it. And oh man, what an opportunity the new sex work is real work movement is for me to talk a little bit about private property. So, in order for me to make a point about capitalism to the left, let's talk whores. What's the saying go like that prostitution is the world's oldest profession? Yeah, well, I'm sure that there actually really is some truth to that. Like Neanderthals living in caves, foraging and hunting for food, and Grug goes out and gets a saber-toothed tiger, and Grugette is back at the cave eyeing those big fangs that Grug brings home, and maybe Grug doesn't want to trade his saber-tooth for Grugette's berries. Saber-tooth has more value to him than the berries do, and the berries are all that Grugette has to trade. Or are they all she can trade? Different times and different cultures have their different views on politicians. Slip of the tongue, prostitution. It's illegal here in the United States now, right? But, you can just film it though, and it's no longer prostitution. You're making porn. That seems arbitrary, but I guess law generally is. But what I was saying was it's illegal now, but back just over 100 years ago in the West, brothels were a mainstay in most towns on the frontier that were large enough to attract travelers. I'm sure that they weren't seeing many honeys and social media influencers out there on the cattle trails, and a man can get pretty lonely. And supply and demand is really a powerful tool because there weren't brothels in the East. There were brothels in the West. There weren't women out West. There were women out East. You get a demand high enough, someone's going to have a supply, and it costs more when it's illegal and you deal with shittier sellers. Shittier meaning a crack dealer that's more likely to mess you up than a drugstore pharmacist, right? Same products, same opioids. It's just legal when it's a pharmacist. So I remember hearing about a study done by some dudes from Yale who were trying to train these monkeys to trade silver for food, like grapes. And during the experiment, they noticed that a few of the monkeys, those cheeky little shits, were giving silver discs to females, having sex, and then the females would buy grapes with the silver. And this is the same thing with penguins who use sex to get pebbles for their nests, and chimpanzees who exchange meat for sex, and I'm sure it happens in a lot of other animals that we just haven't seen yet. And if you really think about it, that's super incredible. And it's basic, but it's also profound. It's supply and demand. It's like an economic transaction, scarce resources in other species. The animals have a demand for sex, and others supply it for a price. It's as simple as any other transaction, any other trade. It's not thought of as such, but it definitely is. And what I find so interesting, though, is that now some of the left, those on the side of the spectrum that generally do not agree with more free market capitalism, are championing prostitution. And of course, with many other social ideas that they hold, it shouldn't come as a surprise that in their attempt to quote, unquote, empower women, many of the same people that applaud, quote, proud sluts are making one hell of a case for capitalism. And I know that most of those people are not capitalist now. So just to be clear before I keep going, yes, I want prostitution legalized. 100%, no caveats. Just like I want the government out of any other business. It's the same with brothels, escorts, call girls, whatever. Would I use them? Hell no. That's gross. And I know that some of you are probably looking at your screen or your radio right now thinking, bullshit. Like, I don't want it legalized for me. I'm not thirsty enough to drink from that water. But what I do see is the efficacy in allowing two people to do what they want with their money and bodies if they're not harming others, right? What's hypocritical and hilarious to me is thinking of how the next few years will go for the sex work is real work movement. At the same time, many of the same people are calling for increased government control of the economy. You know, like on bigger businesses, on the corporations, on the 1%, things like that. What I mean by that is, say that prostitution's legalized, women get super duper empowered, and then tax season comes around, right? There's the rub. That's the moment I guess I can't wait to see, and I'm calling it now. That volatile solution where two prior allied groups mixed, turn on themselves, and hopefully I get to say, I told you so, and then a bunch of people have to pull towards capitalism. I'm going to go out on a limb here with, I'll admit, no evidence, and make the claim that a good amount of the hookers will not be cool with Uncle Sam taking a chunk of the money that they earn. Like, can you imagine? Can you imagine being a prostitute, looking at your pay stub, your little prostitute pay stub, remembering all the gross johns that you had to sleep with, and then seeing the taxes being taken out of your pay? Like Uncle Sam was there holding your hand as some older, hairy, balding guy was up on top of you. Like, I freaked out about tax withholdings working in construction, and I wasn't even getting cummed on at work, and the withholdings still pissed me off. In all honesty, though, you know, like, if I think about the left, I know that most won't see it like this straight away. They'll probably rationalize it in some way. I'm not really sure how, but I'm sure that they will. Americans have just been too quick to accept taxation. So I guess that I'll explain capitalism in its essence and why taxation is theft, using prostitutes as an example. Prostitution to me is the perfect way to explain what capitalism really is. Like, we can go over some misconceptions in the future, and it's also a good way to explain personal property and then why taxation is theft. Just a simple way to think about it all. Walk a mile in those hooker stilettos and then think about getting taxed for all that work. In essence, capitalism is simply private property. That could seem oversimplified to some, but that's really all it is. Capitalism isn't just money, markets, or businesses, things like that. Like, those are just effects. Capitalism is private property, and then trading that private property at your own free will. Private property, though, is like one hell of a debated term right now, or debated subject, I mean, especially on the left. And a good way to talk about private property, though, would be I guess you could call them the means of reproduction, right? Remember, guys, no uterus, no opinion. The idea behind private property stems from the notion that you are the sole owner of your body, plain and simple. Other people cannot control your body, and if they do, that's slavery or some sort of indentured servitude. And does anybody actually believe otherwise? It seems like a pretty truthful statement to me. I'm always trying to argue my own points, but that seems pretty cut and dry. And one statement that you can't really argue with. And I'm sure that most of the left, or staunch opponents of capitalism, believe the same thing. So the first point, you own your body. Like, point 2, private property can extend to the things that you use your body and your mind to create, right? If you take your body out into the woods, you chop up some wood, you build a chair, that is your chair. It's your private property. If anyone were to take said property away from you, yes, they're stealing, but if you think about what they're actually doing, is they're believing themselves to be entitled to the product of what you used your body to create. Like, similar to a slave owner taking his slave's labor without an agreed upon or mutually agreed upon payment. The third point is that, say now you built a few chairs and someone else built a table, and in this stupidly simple analogy, you know how to build chairs, but not a table. So you agree with the table maker to trade some chairs for the table, and now you have a set. You may not have built that table, but in exchange for chairs you did create, that table becomes your property. So if someone takes that table, they're still stealing from you. They're stealing the time and effort you spent with your body on the chairs you used to trade them for. Now, this doesn't seem to really cover what we see today to most people and their ideas on what capitalism is, because what we have today is so much more complicated. Like, the chain of trades in history extends far beyond what any of us were alive for. And the world is so much more advanced and specialized than chair and table building. Like, obviously, but the rules still apply, even with prostitutes. In fact, I think it becomes much more clear when looking at prostitution and private property becomes much more personal than money you make when you work at a desk job working a 9 to 5, right? Women own their bodies, men own their bodies, and women can use those bodies in order to make a trade with sex even. Like, do you believe yourself entitled to that hooker money as long as it buys you more shit, I guess, right? Like, do you believe that the hooker needs to pay for your college degree through student loan forgiveness? Like, really? And I'm sure that a lot of people on the left won't believe that either. So if you were to steal money from a prostitute, what you're doing is you're claiming that you have a right to those sessions or whatever the hell you'd want to call them, and the money that they exchanged sex for. Like, you think she's yours. You're acting like a bit of a pimp, and I don't mean that in the old cool use of the word. Like, there may be a reason that that connotation isn't used much anymore. I don't know. You never hear people saying, like, oh, damn, that guy's such a pimp. When people today think of capitalism, they think like Wall Street, business tycoons, materialism, consumerism, etc. Like, they often also think that the United States is a good example of capitalism, which it's not. Like, it's better than most, but pretty far off. It's like the Soviet Union under communism. It's not a good representation. Like, objectively, it's not. I know the not real communism meme, but Soviet Union is not communist. There is no abolition of money or anything like that. Like, they still had a state. So just like the United States is not a good example anymore with free market capitalism. It was pretty decent in the 19th century. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty decent. But it's gotten significantly worse since then. It's this weird, perverted mixture of, free market capitalism and then big business or big government. And why is the United States or any other state a terrible example of a real capitalist system? It's because the United States acts like your fucking pimp. Like, just like the pimp looking to the girls to fill his pockets with their money, the state does the same thing. Like, I don't know what most pimps take. I'm not sure what their rate is. I'm sure it's a lot. I'm sure that those girls don't have much of a say. But I do know what my pimp, Uncle Sam, takes, because I can look up his working rate online. Like, the state believes that it deserves its cut. It doesn't matter how hard you work for it, what sick shit some John got you to do at work. Like, Uncle Sam wasn't there when you were pulling those long work weeks, and he sure as hell isn't going to be there lubing up the hookers and holding their hands for moral support. But regardless, we all owe him. And pimps in the state, they work the same way. With a pimp, you act out, you do something they don't like, you get bitch slapped. You keep acting out, I'm sure it's not good. The pimp is straightforward. The pimp is, but the pimp is black market. He's operating outside the law. Maybe he operates in the same way as the state, but 350 million people in the U.S. aren't indoctrinated with pimp law. Like, the state hides in its laws. It hides in its fines and jail time. And, if you resist them, then your reward is death. Like, we're taught to hate the pimp now, extorting young girls, using them for his own payday. But we're taught to respect the state. We believe that it's in our best interest. We've seen enough stories of the other hoes getting cracked, and we don't want none of that. Like, we got our jobs, get the withholdings taken out of our pay, and we don't really say anything about it. We get some things in return, like schools, roads, Social Security, and Medicare, which we could most definitely buy for ourselves without the useless middleman that is government. And the more that we give control over to the state, we get bigger things like UBI and college debt forgiveness and Medicare for all. Pimps give the girls back some of what they take from those girls as well. Like, they'll get to eat, maybe. they get a place to stay every night. Like, free car rides to their appointments. The pimp is really just the exaggerated version of what the state can be when the people are too weak enough to defend their private property. when they can't say no or fight back. He keeps them in line with threats of violence or actual violence, just like the state. It's not very free market when it's acceptable to steal shit or force other people to give you shit, extort, which is really just theft. It's just a means of theft. But I guess what really irks me is that people see pimping almost as a form of slavery, or I guess some sort of weird sexual indentured servitude. Like, people despise pimps generally. People, however, tend to see the state as the status quo. Your body is yours, and what you use your body to create is yours, and no one has the right to take that away unless you trade it, including the state. I guess in essence, we're all just whores. So, whores, shut up and take that dick for Uncle Sam.